It's connecting. It connected. I am recording. You are recording. We are perfect. Well, close to perfect. So anything else we need to cover before we start letting people in? It looks like we've got 40 something, and I'm guessing a lot more people are going to show up.
Logistically, I feel fine. Do we have an opening question or topic we want to start with, or?
I mean, there's just the one question about generalization. We don't have to start there, though.
Okay.
And then I think if I turn off, let me see, I think I have to change the function. You may know this better than I do, Hannah. Turning off the lobby.
Oh, I don't actually.
I can just hit admit all, but then I don't know if we have to by hand still let everyone into the, I think we just turn off the lobby.
I don't know if that blocks people or not, because it's different than it used to be.
We'll leave it on and we'll just admit people.
I can, yeah, with two, I can see it as well, so I can click people through.
Okay. So do we want to, are we ready? Are we ready to admit everybody?
We are. I might try to join double. If so, please allow me to do that, because then I can watch you on my computer as well.
Okay, and we're going to keep everybody else muted, I think. Let's start. All right. I think we have admitted everyone. I think people are all clicking up. We're gonna, maybe I might not have everybody muted. I do not have everybody muted. Well, that's gonna be the start of that. So what we should do is everyone should mute their mic if they're not already muted. Let's see, I'm sure there's a way for me to change that. Okay, mute all participants upon entry. Yes. Everyone else should be muted. So let's just make sure. Oh, I can unenable the waiting room. Do we want to go ahead and do that, Hannah, do you think, or should we not?
We still have people joining. So I think we'll
probably have some people joining late as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'll just keep admitting people.
Okay. Okay. So I think, and I'm not sure that people are being muted upon entry, but we can always go through by hand and mute that. But otherwise, people should mute themselves, and we can type into chat, and we're pretty much going. So however you all want to start.
Well, we've got, I think the simplest with this many people, if anybody has like questions that they want to ask, probably the simplest is to throw them in the chat. If you know how to do the chat, you can, I'm on my computer, so it's shows up on the bottom, of my screen. I'm still learning the mobile app, but I think you can find that there.
But I can't keep going on and on a little. But I will help. I'll get the pictures on my email.
We want to make sure everybody's microphones are muted that are not us, not the four of us. So let's make sure everyone mutes their mic. We can go through and mute if needed. But all people who were initially admitted are not muted right now.
Well, I think I've got most of them, but there were probably a couple of people early on before we got the settings situated. Yeah. So yeah, so as folks are joining, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I think that's probably the fastest way with this many people. And feel free to use the chat, you know, whatever, inappropriate joke, comments, questions, any of those things work just fine. I'm sure there will be a few inappropriate jokes in the video stream as well.
Not at all.
No.
Never.
Above board professional.
Absolutely, 100%.
Wearing pants.
100% professional. That's what I'm known for. That is my brand.
Well, we're all wearing pants. Just be happy.
Speak for
Emelie,
yourself.
I'm just wondering, how do you know?
Well, Hannah's
Yeah.
wearing makeup. I assume that means pants.
After these many months of COVID-19, why would you assume such a thing?
I am wearing
Well,
bra.
that's see, perfection. Well, I actually have a little, I don't know where it went, but I normally have a sheet just next to my laptop where you can play Zoom bingo. Am I muted? Am I muted? Check. You hear wailing children in the background? Check. I don't know how to share my screen. I don't know how to share my screen. Check. So that's what I normally do.
So
By the
that's
way,
not what we're gonna do today. We're gonna have
I
serious
should-
conversations, Emelie.
I was going to say I'm not wearing makeup, but I am wearing glasses.
See?
So I guess that makes me seem a little more professional. Maybe.
Looks very intellectual.
I'm ready for intellectual discussion.
Fake it till you make it. So where shall we start? We were talking about training for confidence and emotions and behavior, or training in emotions, all as possible starting points.
We also have a comment in the thread that is like a proper serious, not only going for the inappropriate jokes comment from Eve, who says, could you comment on the logic behind using location-specific markers for training a sensitive dog? So we can add that one to our list.
For sure.
All right, then.
It's a good one.
I like it. Well, where do you all want to start? That is up to you all.
I mean, we could definitely start there, since we have a live person. We have a live one.
An actual person asking an actual question. We have suggestions of starting with confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very much on topic for confidence building.
Yeah.
Particularly in that I think we need to start by defining what do we mean by a sensitive dog and what do we mean by a location-specific marker, because those are both phrases that get thrown around a lot, and I think they can mean different things to different people.
Yep.
Yeah, so Hannah,
Let's
how would you describe a sensitive dog? What do you think of?
I'm thinking of the dogs in my house that I generally might categorize as sensitive. And if I contrast them to a dog in my house that I don't categorize as sensitive, I feel like Spark, for example, has a lot of meaningful stimuli in her world. A lot of, like, everything means something to her, usually something bad. Unless I've worked to create a different association there, compared to, say, like Rugby, who's probably the least sensitive dog. It seems to take more for different stimuli to take on meaning for him, I guess, for them to be relevant. So, you know, a change in flooring or a new sound is going to have more likely to have a reaction and a larger observable reaction from Spark than, say, from Rugby. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm thinking from the word sensitive and relating to senses, that your comment that a lot of environmental events will occasion behaviors, and a lot of environmental events will function as negative reinforcers. My first thought when I hear somebody say my dog is very sensitive, I would think of a dog that where there are a lot of negative reinforcement contingencies in that dog's day-to-day life. There are a lot of stimuli, or a lot of contingencies that are on the escape avoidance side of things. But but also the second part of it, which you also were talking about there, that it sticks, as in it's not only the response in the moment, but it's also response later to both just later in the day to whatever stimuli, or later to same or similar stimuli.
Yeah, and similar tends to be broader too. So same or similar, and the similar category can be quite broad. And that's when people start to talk about generalization, but where we would probably call it something else. And somebody said something about a dog, a sensitive dog. I think of a dog who shuts down easily. Well, shutting down, what does that look like? Are we talking about not reinforce, like Eva said before, what contingencies are we operating in? What reinforces our withholding, what are maintaining what behaviors, and what can we work with? And it's like, I think that for like practical reasons, that's one of the things that will pop up a lot, that the reinforcement procedures that I thought that I had are no longer functional here because we're now operating within a different contingency.
I think that's you both are, I think that's the two sides of it. It's that for my more sensitive dog, she has a lot of negative reinforcement contingencies in play at any one time. And when for her shutting down, I think shutdown again can mean a lot of things, but like, let's say I'm going to define it for our purposes as she leaves the training session, or she stops doing the behaviors that are the focus of my training session. Often in her case, she physically leaves the space. With a different dog, shutting down might just look like less and less movement until they're totally stationary. But I think either way, one way that I might describe that is that the negative reinforcement contingencies are outweighing, is the word concurrent what I want here, the positive reinforcement. Like, I'm trying to bring positive reinforcement into this training session, but her negative reinforcement based worries are higher up. Like they're outweighing it.
So what you're saying, Hannah, is that cues to behaviors that are under positive reinforcement don't occasion any behavior, or much less than they normally would, and that your usual positive reinforcers don't seem to function as reinforcers in that environment or in that setting. So
yeah.
How about let's take a step back really quick, because part of this, and this is something that you all are talking about as well, is what do we mean even just when we use some other label, when we use some term, right? So, and at the end of the day, what we talk about, what behaviorists talk about in terms of behavior, how we define a behavior, so how we operationally define it, means really two components, which is that it's observable and measurable. So that's what we have to, so if we say, okay, what I mean by a dog being more sensitive is that I mean it's more prone to shut down. Okay, but now we need to define what shut down means, right? So what we're looking for ultimately is a way that we can that we can observe and measure that response. That's how we have to define any component. And then if the use of that construct that we've created provides any utility beyond that, then we can continue to use it, but it may become unnecessary at that point. So in the lease, if we talk about, okay, well, this particular animal tends to do this more often than this other animal. Okay, what is that thing? Well, they tend to respond, when I say they're more sensitive, I mean any external stimuli produces some type of reaction. Okay, what's the reaction? We still need to define what the reaction is. Ultimately, we're getting to an observable, measurable response that we need to define. And it could be, I think what can be frustrating is that people will say, well, but you know what I mean. But do I? That's part of the question, is because it turns out often we don't. So this is why you have to, because you may assume that there is a generalized response, which is different. So when we talk about response generalization versus stimulus generalization, these two things are different. We'll get in, I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms also as well as stimulus control, but we can't assume that we're talking about the same thing. This is part of the reason why we focus on specific language. So those are just some of the initial assumptions that we have to be careful about what we make when we talk about behavior. So other than that, I'm just going to mention somebody else asked about fluency, and they were asking about fluency versus, and we can talk a little bit about fluency here in a second, but we'll come back to that because that's a little off topic. So fluency versus, I don't remember what the question was, fluency versus some other aspect.
Versus confidence, and I don't think that's off topic, and I think we will get to that, but let's keep
Okay.
going down this thread.
Yeah.
Because
Stay
I think
in that rabbit hole.
well, I think we might eventually get there, because I think
Yes.
one of the things that I think, and so this is interesting because I think we have a lot of overlap with people as well when we use words like sensitive or oversensitive. I think context has a lot to do with it, right? So it's really hard to talk about that because a person, for example, sometimes it's easier to start, for me at least, just to start with a human example and then backtrack to the dog example, and sometimes
Sure.
vice versa.
Yeah.
Like I might seem to my husband oversensitive in some areas of life, and I don't consider myself to be, I think that I'm rational and my reactions are entirely reasonable under all contexts, but probably I'm more sensitive in some situations than others, or in, like, to some things in some places. And I think there are probably, I know what, well, now I feel like Eddie's going to catch me, but I think that I know what most people are thinking, or at least generally in what country they're in when they're thinking, this dog is sensitive, or at least as a relative term, more sensitive than this dog, right? So like your typical Belgian Turf is going to be more sensitive than your typical field-bred Labrador in the way that I have these conversations, or Golden.
You didn't say, oh, darn, you didn't say Golden. You were doing so well.
But I also know that for individual dogs that I've spent time with, different situations we see like just a lot of difference, like the toughest Malinois out on the field, on the protection field, could be perceived as sensitive in like a vet exam room, or even at home, right? Like in just a different environment, different context, different antecedents, different reinforcement contingencies available. So maybe instead of trying to decide if this individual dog meets the qualifications for a diagnosis of sensitive, we should look more at, in this particular context, in this situation, my dog is responding to stimuli I wish she wouldn't, and she's the behaviors that she's performing are ones that I wish I weren't getting. I'd rather get these behaviors for these cues and have I'll just say, like, I want to use training reinforcers here as like a category for things that I can easily control.
Mm-hmm.
So toys, stuff that the traditional training reinforcers, compared to, like, yes, we could use anything as reinforcement in the environment, but some things are more convenient than others. And a lot of what I'm looking to do when I'm building a training relationship with an animal is make the more convenient set of reinforcers that I can keep in my pocket more valuable and more effective in the situations where I want to get this particular set of behaviors. So what I run into with could happen with any of my dogs, I'll keep using Spark as my example, is I might be in, it doesn't have to be a competition setting, but a competition is a good place where it happens a lot, where the negative reinforcement opportunities of avoiding unfamiliar people, unfamiliar dogs, weird heating vents, terrifying trash cans, her like the behaviors that would move her away, those avoidance behaviors, are at odds with what I would like her to do, which is to stay and do healing or jump and weave. And the jump and weave and the healing are trained with positive reinforcers, my training reinforcers primarily. And then I also am in competition with her desire to avoid these other negative reinforcers. And so a lot of what I had to do over the years was put a lot of deposits, do a lot of conditioning, a lot of training or reinforcement strategies. And if I treat those as behaviors and cues, then stimulus control, generalization, fluency, like all that kind of comes into play from a practical training plan perspective. I forget which kind of brings us to maybe the original question, which was how could we tie that into something like location specific markers?
Yeah, and it's interesting when we start our conversations from the label, because it's so easy to talk as if sensitivity is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had this conversation in a Norwegian group on just this weekend with discussions on what is the issue with these labels, and I think sensitive dog or sensitivity is a really good example of it. That as soon as we call the dog sensitive, it's a pretty short step to where one might say the dog does this because of its sensitivity.
And then it just goes around and around.
Yeah.
How do I know that he's sensitive?
The dog looks
because
fine now, but she's still sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
yeah, it's easy to mask, and that comes together with what you were saying, that it's context specific. It's up to under these conditions we see these behaviors and we see these reinforcers being functional, or we see these cues occasioning behavior. And if we change the situation, we will change the dog, we will change the behavior, and we will change everything.
Well, the question just popped up in the chat. So is sensitive the same as reactive? Well, that depends on what we're operationalizing it as. I mean, reactive and sensitive might be the same. Eva might describe and operationalize reactive in one way that is my sensitive. So that's not, I don't know, even I can't really answer that question, I feel, because that depends on what you call them. Eva, weren't we touching on all this location specific when we were talking about training session structure the other day, and the case of my field golden, Hannah? So Eva's been to my place, but the rest of the world probably hasn't. So we have rabbits, a lot of rabbits. And I have a field golden, she's 2 years old. She has 2 brain cells when it comes to rabbits. And we were talking about the fact that literally, if I just walk across my small street out here, the reinforcement contingencies, what reinforcers that are available for which behaviors, have nothing to do with me if I go straight over the road. But if I square to the right, where there's an open area like asphalt, the bunnies are just next to it. But she knows I have her blanket, we go over there, and then all of a sudden, all the reinforcers that have anything to do with anything are what you just defined as training reinforcers. All of a sudden, we just pop into that instead, and it's literally go straight ahead, nothing to do with me. Reinforcers. And it's fascinating to see. Did I freeze up? You froze.
Briefly.
Just for a second.
Okay. So Evan, you and I were talking about this whole, the whole thing about how the training session structure, if it's very set, can somehow, I'm test talking now. So Eva, you're going to save me from this one if I make a mess of it.
You're good.
I'm good. How the training session structure can somehow pop me into that contingency instead of the other contingency of which behaviors are available to me for which reinforcers. And I find it very, very interesting. And when I started training dogs back in the Stone Ages in 1989, we would have talked about generalization in the way of, so the dog learns sit in the kitchen and then you kind of take it on the road, and that means that the dog is generalizing the behavior. And that's no longer the way that I think about it. And I'm sure it's not as sophisticated as some other lines of thinking, but it's interesting to just watch it kind of play out.
Yeah. So I want to take a step back, a couple things, because it's popping up in the chat. And this is my role this entire time, is to keep taking steps back. But there are a couple things that have come up. And the first I'll deal with quickly, which is people are now focusing on defining reactive versus sensitive. And I just want to keep in mind that, again, these are constructs that we're creating. And part of what happens when we use these constructs to try to determine behavior is we're trying to turn them into what ends up becoming a circular a bit of logic, in that we're trying to use that to then explain the behavior. And that's why people hold on. So if I say, well, the dog's being reactive, and it's because the dog is reactive, you see the difficulty there? So why did the dog do that? Because they're a reactive dog.
Yeah, I think the circular logic, I know circular logic is bad because I had that comment written at the top of my papers in high school at times. And it was associated with a point deduction. But I think it's not always easy to spot, even in myself, right? Sometimes I'm making, especially if it's something that I want to be true. So can we break that down a little bit before we go further?
Yeah.
You're starting to do that. I just want to do it more explicitly.
Yeah. No, that's a good catch. So the temptation is that what we're often looking for when we describe behavior is we want to find a way to, so I'm going to talk about not necessarily circular logic here, but what we're doing. So as I was mentioning, when we say something like, we want to define the dog as reactive, this is now a trait of the dog. So this is part of what I and others call nouning the action. Okay, so it's turning a behavior into itself into a trait. So that person isn't jogging, they are a jogger. So that's a loose one, but we can then say, yeah, it's not, the person isn't engaging in some type of aggressive response, they are aggressive. And now we can start defining this in terms of, deficiencies, et cetera, that are related to that person, rather than addressing the issue of the behavior. So this is one rabbit hole, not our type of rabbit hole, but a rabbit hole that becomes difficult to deal. So I know, Hannah, you want to really deal more specifically with circular logic and how this relates, right?
Well, I think I actually think they're both pieces of the same problem.
Sure.
If we are, Lynn points out, reifying is a word for taking those things and applying them as if they are characteristics of the person, I think, or animal. And we often, like, the reactive one is an interesting one because these are hard for me to talk about. I don't know about you guys, but the reason I talk slow and I'm constantly backpedaling is because I'm trying to sort out a lot of brain cells, because in my head, most of my brain knows what I'm talking about when I say reactive. I have pamphlets for my business. Is your dog reactive? I can help. Here's my phone number and email address. And then I stopped having a phone number because that's just too much. But, and I'll say, I have lots of experience with reactive dogs. I've got Belgians. But also then I'm like, well, what's a reactive dog? Oh, well, it's one that lunges and barks at other dogs. Well, and then I think, well, how do you know that he's reactive because he lunges and barks? Why does he lunge and bark? Because he's reactive.
Right.
but I might add additional, oh, well, he lunges and barks because he's stressed by other dogs. Why is he stressed by other dogs? So like I have to move my brains out of that old path of, and even, this is more ADHD than normal. Let me see. I'm trying to keep this in one lane.
Yeah, no worries.
We will have arguments, and I have had arguments. He's not really aggressive. He's reactive.
Right.
Yeah.
And in my head, huge difference. Give me a dog that lunges and barks over one that's going to bite me. But then I could just say, has this dog bitten? And now we're on behaviors: barking, lunging, biting, could be other things.
Right. So I know, and I saw this, I did not mean to reward this, but I saw a chat response that's in all caps. So it, this is why I guess we type in all caps, is because then it gets people's attention. And I'm not supposed to
Eva's trying to keep us on topic.
right. I just felt like I got yelled at in chat. So I was like, this is what I want to know. There's just a couple points about this. So why do different cues for different reinforcement procedures increase confidence in a dog? Again, so going back to what we are defining in terms of the response, I mean, these are different responses. So different conditions different responses under different conditions should be affected, and this is very much true for different functional classes of responses, should be affected by different rewards. So that's an important component. The second is, by no means, it's worth pointing out that we're not, it works to a certain extent. There's a reason why we do create constructs at some level, and it's because they can create a certain ease with which we can then describe a different set of response patterns. So it might be, if I have two different dogs, and I use this example when I talk about two different species. So I've worked with over 50 different species of animals, and I will tell you that there's a lot of things that polar bears do very differently than meerkats. Okay, so and I can say that fairly broadly, that the species polar bears do have certain differences. It's still, we have to examine that in terms of its utility to say, so if I start saying, well, polar bears are just more aggressive than meerkats, I don't know what that means still. Right?
Put me in a room with a polar bear, put me in a room with a meerkat. I know which one I vote for.
Right, the polar bear.
The penguin.
Okay. How many meerkats are we talking?
53.
Oh, okay, never mind. Everyone knows more than 17 meerkats, and you're on your own.
Yeah. So this is not, I just want to be clear that when we talk about defining responses and focusing on behavior, it doesn't take away from the fact that there are things like species typical aspects of behavior, characteristics that we can define. It just still means that we have to identify and focus on behavior for the sake of, for no other reason than the fact that we need to know that we're talking about the same things with each other. This is not denying, and this is the one argument that I've heard where people assume, and I understand it can be frustrating when we start focusing only on behavior. People, oh, well, you think we're a blank slate. You just think nothing exists in the organism. There's nothing that's relevant towards just the organism itself. That is not what we're saying. What we're saying is we have to be on the same page. We need to be clear about what those responses are. And that's why we focus directly on behavior. So
I have
something that really helped me. Oh, sorry, Emelie, you were going?
Yeah, I'm still on the all caps and the location.
Well, no, that's where I'm trying to keep us steered back.
Yeah, I'm on the all caps one. So Why do different cues for different reinforcement procedures increase confidence in a dog? Do we have consensus on that?
No, I would say,
Yeah.
and I wrote that in the chat because that seems to be a good place to get things said. What effects do we see from using location-specific markers? And even more so, what other strategies can give the same effects? Because I think that there can be mistakes there.
Okay, let me see if I can take this from a different angle and answer the question I think Eva's actually asking. And you'll like it, even Emelie, and I want you to then take it from me. Okay. So here's what I think. Let's think about the reinforcement response to an event marker as a behavior, or the response to an event marker that we've trained with positive reinforcement as a behavior. Your dog's head snaps around to take the treat. They orient to where the ball is going to go. Whatever the thing, it can look like so many things. If part of what we're going to put in the bucket of confidence is the probability that when the event marker is presented that we get the behavior, like that behavior is very fluent. It's very high probability that when I click, my dog is going to respond in the same way in a lot of different environments. His head's going to snap around with the same energy, with the same direction of motion, same speed of motion, low latency, all of those things.
All right.
If I approach my training program by trying to get really fluent responses of those behaviors.
And we're going to have to define that.
Of course we are.
So I wanted to hand it off.
Yeah.
But
No worries.
we define on my spreadsheet of reinforcement strategies that I want to be able to use with my dog. And I want these reinforcement strategies to be like the most fluent, most high probability behaviors that my dog responds to in this corresponding spreadsheet of training situations that we're likely to be in.
So in all these training situations, when you present a specific marker, that functions as a cue for behavior, and it happens pretty much every time, regardless of setting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's just take location-specific markers as a separate construct off for right now, because I think that clouds it.
So now you were saying just any cue or any marker? Or any whatever?
Well, a cue could be a lot of things.
Uh-huh. So what were you talking about 30 seconds ago? What kind of cue were you talking about?
Meerkats.
So, okay.
Penguins.
So there are a couple. So let's say that we have this list of specific reinforcement strategies, behaviors that we want to make little chains out of to build new behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So because even to have this conversation, we have to talk about the reinforcement stuff as behaviors and or behaviors.
So you're talking throwing a ball straight ahead, and the dog going for it, coming back to you if you give a treat from your hand, going for it
taking
left,
a
right,
tug toy, going to take a stationed food off to one side, turning back to take a Zen bowl behind them. Like you decide for your training, what do you need? I understand that it may be valuable to have something you can deliver quickly while close to you, something that you can throw far away from you, something that you can send a dog to get. And maybe there are some others. I don't have the book open, but
I know you would. I was like, she's quoting me.
So everybody gets to decide like what handful of stuff is useful for you. Then we need some kind of stimulus control over when that starts. And that could be a specific acoustic stimulus, right? It could be a word or a sound. It could also be a visual cue, or it could be one of those things in some larger context, which I know is closer to what you guys do.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things kind of meet that same need, right? But I think all of those start with a really clearly defined behavior that we're training from, and I'm talking from a training plan perspective, because I'm to use that to insulate myself against scientific language. I think when we train those with fluency in mind and stimulus control in mind, we do a lot more splitting. And I wonder.
And we shouldn't. We should split as much or more in what.
Well,
you're
right. Well,
discussing.
I'm wondering if when I'm a better trainer, because I'm being more mindful about how I'm breaking down my reinforcement procedures, is that not really what's giving me the better outcome? Not the DVD title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to add to the term, when we're talking fluent here, or we're talking it happens every time, we would also add to that, it happens seamlessly.
Yes.
Seamlessness it tends to be a helpful construct here, in terms of the dog is everything, all the dog's muscles are going in the direction of that reinforcer right away. So no part of the dog is going elsewhere. Everything, all the behaviors are oriented toward the end goal of grabbing that ball or whatever it is. So however we accomplish that, if we accomplish that through a location-specific marker, or if we're accomplishing that through some other strategy in our training that ensures the same thing happens, that when we present the reinforcer, the dog or the learner has always, everything about it is going for that. There are no other responses going in other directions, both physically and functionally.
I want to take a step back again. This is my role this entire time, to keep taking steps back. But I do want to take a step back, because there's something that I'd like trainers to get in the habit of, and this is, as an empiricist, as all behaviorists, we're supposed to be empirically based, right? When I talk about, we define behavior in terms of observable, measurable responses. Behavior analysis itself is a field that is defined by data. It is a field that is defined by the science, meaning you are not doing behavior analysis in the absence of data. You are applying principles of behavior analysis in the absence of data. So that said, too, reinforcement is actually defined in terms of data. So when this is one of those ideas where I say, I think it's great that we are attempting to assess the function of some behavior in terms of, is this negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement, or et cetera. Although, and again, other behavior analysts have brought into question the utility of using those terms even in and of itself, but we're going to not go there. I want to make a more important, broader point, which is, we can't assume that this is in fact even reinforcing, let alone negatively reinforcing or positively reinforcing. We are hypothesizing a potential reinforcing function here, but you don't know that in the absence of data. So you don't know that, whether that is in fact, is escape the function of that response? I don't know. How do you know that? Did you collect data in that sense? It's one of the reasons why, and this is the part that I wanted to turn trainers on to more so, I tend to use the term reward more than I use the term reinforcement when I talk about using a consequence to try to increase behavior, because the main point here is try. So in the absence of knowing that I have in fact reinforced a response, all I can say is that I'm using a reward. We need
and
to, so
it's all that comes together with, we might be presenting that toy or that treat for a variety of functions. So yes, totally agree on using reward as a generic term rather than reinforcer.
Right.
Or agree that when we talk about reinforcement procedures, that what we're talking about is procedures of presenting potential reinforcer.
Right.
Reinforcers. Because as
And
you
I
say, we can't
I have
know.
I have removed some demand. I have removed some aversive. Okay. Did the removal of that aversive negatively reinforce that response? We don't know that yet. So the importance here, and I know I'm adding another layer that can already, for people that may be struggling with not categorizing or turning things into constructs, I do want to just point out, by the way, that all of these things, and this is a really important point, all of these things are approximations to some, in some sense, never truly obtainable target response. So that these are things that, so let me give you an example, just to point this out. So my mother, all my great examples involve my mother at some level. That's what my EAB students would tell you. My mother, when she describes what I do for a living, she says things like, well, I don't really know. I'm not going to do her Cuban voice right now. But she says, you know, I don't really, he makes penguins' lives, he makes penguins happy. So is that necessarily inaccurate? Well, I mean, it's not how I would define, right? So I will just agree and concur with her and say, sure, you know, she'll sometimes describe me as a psychologist for, you know, polar bears, or things like that. All of these things, you know, we are using construct. I mean, I use constructs myself regularly to describe at a scientific level, not at a scientific level. So both. Sorry, I'm turning my phone off as I got distracted there for a second. But we're talking about working on approximation. So when I talk about defining the categories, the constructs we use, this is not just, it's not like, well, either you do it or you don't, because I think that leads to the frustration of saying, I'm done with this behavioral stuff. I'm just going to keep using the term sensitive dog and reactive dog, and that's fine. Well, look, let's just take a step and say, how about work on, you know, maybe we change a little bit about what we say. And we change a little bit about defining these responses and then focusing directly on behavior. And any movement in that direction provides a certain amount of utility for our behaviorese. So that's just the simple point that I wanted to make there, because I don't think that's emphasized enough, that we're talking about that's never perfect, but can move towards perfection.
Yes.
So approximations to a target response.
And this continually happens when we're having these discussions, that we're bouncing back and forth between trying to tease out what is actually going on in a set of training sessions.
Yeah.
That's like one set. And the other set is, how are we talking about this to ensure that it actually makes sense? That we are talking about the same thing, and that we are not using language that becomes problematic. At some point, maybe not today, I have a suggestion, and I need you to remember this one. Because what we should do is have a queuing system for which path we are on. So if I am talking about, let's just get to the behavior, the dog, the training, whatever we are doing and whatever we're trying to accomplish. All right, that'll be my wine glass. I am now talking about things that have to do with...
I did not know there would be wine.
The dog and the behavior. But Hannah, how are you thinking? Of course there's wine. There's always wine.
Well,
I mean,
and if I get up,
vodka, so I don't know what you guys are doing, but...
I just hit it in my teacup.
This is a serious discrimination thing, because that would be the cue for whatever I'm saying now, whether I'm using labels or not, I'm talking about the training. Oh no, did I freeze?
No.
Am I back?
No, you're good.
I think that's really valuable.
And then we'll have the water glass for the puristic. We are now talking about language and doing our best to just get to observables.
There's value in both.
Vodka.
Yeah.
It's vodka, of course it is.
So that we can bounce back and forth, and I and everybody else might have a better chance of knowing which path are we on. Are we working on the language issues, or are we working with the dog?
But Eva, isn't that normally what we do when we talk together, just the two of us? I would say to you with my cue, I'm test talking. And that means that I'm trying to tease something out from I'm talking about something that the dog does. And I'll just use whatever label goes through my mind to kind of try to paint the picture. And then you're going to ask the questions, what does that look like? What does that look like? What does that look like? Until we've kind of teased out the whole dog training part of it. And then we normally switch over to, okay, so what kind of language would be correct here if we want to go down that? Exactly. There goes the,
Right.
but because I have
Right.
to be able to, if I'm trying to figure something out about something that my dog is doing in training, then I'm not going to be perfect with a water glass. I'm going to be trying to figure out what's going on. And then I kind of have to approximate the language in another kind of lane.
Yep.
Otherwise,
Right.
if I try to do them both at once, my thinking is going to be really impaired on what's going on in the training situation, because I'm thinking about my wording, and that's not going to be constructive.
If
Yeah.
you have a lot of learning history with your words, we don't have a solid learning history of what words to use to describe our training session and our observations with ourselves and with our learners in like descriptive language. We just don't have that learning history, most of us.
And I think test talking is a really valuable kind of label to have on. I haven't really thought this through yet, but I would like to speak to you about it. And I don't want to have to be perfect, but can we kind of have this conversation anyway? Otherwise,
need to pour it. Yeah, I need to pour it out into the pen sieve, and then stir it around with my wand,
and then kind of
see what floats up to the top, and then we can translate it.
And if you get kind of, I don't know, if that's not okay, then A, I don't find it fun, and B, my thinking is not going to develop if I'm not allowed to just go, okay, blip, here it is, and now let's see what we can do with it. So I think that I'm absolutely on the track that Eva is, that there's kind of two lanes, and that we have to have them both.
I think especially coming from particularly the angle where we are, where I don't know about you guys, but I'm often just kind of like fucking around with a lot of different things, and something works, and then I'm like, okay, if I do that again, does it work? Oh my God, it does. If I do this again, does it work again? Let me grab one of my students that's more forgiving. I want you to do this thing. And okay, is it working for them? And then I'm trying to figure out what of the stuff I just changed, because it's super hard to be very scientific in real life, in somebody's house, in my own yard. What of those things is the thing that I changed that mattered?
Yeah.
And then and then separate, kind of like what, I can't remember if you mentioned it already, or if I'm just superimposing previous conversations, Eva, but then how do I communicate that effectively to someone else so they can do it too? Because I know a lot of the times, like, I'll write up what I think are incredibly complete and thorough instructions, have a student do it, get a totally different outcome. And half of the time it's because they didn't do what I wrote, but half of the time they did exactly what I wrote, and what I wrote wasn't right. And it doesn't mean that my training technique was necessarily flawed in and of itself, but it often means that what I thought was important about that and tried to communicate in words turned out not to actually be what was important about that. But without somebody like you guys to like bounce shit off of.
Exactly. And
So
also, what would that be?
Can we bounce around with the location-specific markers for a bit?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Let's. There are a couple things I wanna come back to just really quick, because we want to let's just talk about fluency very quickly. But I also want to just mention that that's perfect in terms of language, and that's one of the things that I try to emphasize, because, for instance, some things like location-specific markers, I'm not familiar with acronyms or abbreviations that might be specific to particular areas of the dog training world or things like that, and it's very easy to get bogged down in our own language, and so we need to make this as non-aversive as possible for the learner, because we are all learners here. And so this is one of the things I say about behaviorese as well, is okay, let's talk about how we can work on that in a way that is not aversive for the other people involved. And I think I can tell you how I was trained as an undergrad, and how I was trained as an undergrad with behavior analysts in a room, and then throughout grad school as a behavior analyst, is if you ever said, I reinforced the kid for, you got verbally smacked for that. Reinforce a response, not an organism. So things like that. And that's really, it worked. If your motivation is high in this sense, again, see here I'm talking about now motivation, so I'm using this particular construct. But if you are working hard for some response, and in this case to be a good scientist, then all those aversives you tend to ignore. It doesn't mean they don't affect you, but this is the way I was trained to speak behaviorese, and there are certain definitions now that I can recite like a military cadet, and I don't think that necessarily has good utility. In the sense of, there are even some things that I'll cringe a little bit when I see other behavior analysts do that or talk to someone.
And when you say has good utility, mean it doesn't affect how you would approach a training problem one way or the other.
Right. That's one of the aspects is that do we need the behaviorese in every instance, and does it have to be 100% correct? I don't think so. At the sense, certainly not 100% correct. I do think behaviorese has its utility, but I don't think it has utility at the expense of turning people off from being able to describe what they do in ways that can then translate to other people's techniques. So it's a fine line to walk that line. Now, I am a behaviorist. My phone's going off again. So obviously, language ends up being an important part for science for me. And I look to ways to maximize that language for everyone. So that's what I have to say about the language aspect. I do want to come back, and I'm going to say the fluency thing before we go into location-specific markers. Here's a simple thing that I say about fluency. Now I'm just going to destroy everything that I was just saying about language. So the way animal trainers are using the term fluency is often incorrect. So that's the simplest thing that I can say here. What is fluency? Fluency has a very specific definition within the behavioral world. It is speed and accuracy, more specifically defined. It is response over time. So it is what would be described as frequency over time. Okay, so this is the term. And what that means is, here's what people like Ogden Lindsley use to describe fluency. Okay, so what he said was, often what we do is we focus on accuracy. So if I give you a bunch of math problems and I say, can you solve all of these math problems? Yes, you can get 100% correct. Okay, how long did it take you? A month. Okay, was that necessarily the target response? No. How about, can you solve all 10 of these math problems within 20 seconds or 30 seconds? This is why we talk about fluency from the perspective of Ogden Lindsley. So is that we are talking about frequency over time. So that's what it means, speed plus accuracy. That's what we mean. So if you say, well, this behavior is very fluent. Okay. So the dog is doing it he's doing it really well, really fast? No, he's just doing it really well. So, right. But so there's two components to this. So that's the second component. So the first part is, I often see people using fluency when they are actually meaning accuracy. But then the second part is, how do you know the response is fluent? Are you testing it in conditions in which you are looking at speed plus accuracy? Then yes. So I think we are ideally looking to define the response in terms of it being fluent.
I am very glad.
Eva.
Oh.
Yeah.
Emily, are you gonna go on the same path that I'm going? You better.
Where are you going? You go.
I am going with fluent. What it looks like. If we look at somebody who is running fluency tests and we say they have high fluency, my hypothesis is that if we observe each of these repetitions, each of the trials, what we will see is very close to what we're looking for when we talk seamlessness, and very close to what I tried to describe before, in everything in this organism is going in the direction of the end of that response.
I mean, that's what leads to your graph going up, because other behaviors aren't happening. Like if you're doing, so there are lots of ways to decrease rate. You can have increased time between when you perceive the cue and when you begin doing the behavior, latency. So you have the math problem in front of you and it takes you a lot of time to start it because you have to get a snack and then a drink and then you have to go to the bathroom. And then actually really you want to change your socks because these are a little bit wet. And let me just check my email one more time. And oh, I just got a Facebook notification. And then you start the math problem. You're going to have a low rate. If once you started the math problem, you make a lot of errors before you finally get to the right one, you're going to have a lower rate. If you start the math problem,
and if you make the errors in your head, in your thinking, so you just have to think.
So you're having or you're very, the wheels are grinding slow. I don't have a better way to describe that one. As you move through it, you finish one problem and then you have to go get a snack and a drink and go to the bathroom and check Facebook before you can start another one. Like all those things are going to decrease your rate. Any one of those things, all those things together, when those start to disappear, we have closer to what you call seamlessness, where I finish a math problem, I go to the next one, I finish that math problem, I go to the next one. We can be seamless and still have slow grinding wheels. So that's not probably sufficient for fluency in and of itself.
Can we be seamless? No.
Thank you, Emelie.
Could I walk through the weave poles, but not do anything else?
No. If it's not accurate, if that doesn't meet my criterion for accuracy, it's not gonna go into the fluency category because it's not gonna meet the accuracy criteria.
Where I was going, Eva, was the fact. So
okay, that's fair.
We just had the discussion that
thank you.
Dog trainers seem to use fluency incorrectly. And that's where my brain is still stuck. And I
think bad dog trainers use fluency incorrectly. I think the
bad dog trainers do all sorts.
Define a bad dog trainer. I pulled
by the way,
bad dog trainer.
But by the way, I did want to throw out, Hannah, I big kudos there. You even used the term rate there, which is very, I was even avoiding necessarily to throw any confusion in there, but now that we're there, so when we're talking about rate, we are really talking about frequency over time, which is part of that definition of fluency, which is then response over time. Although depending on who you talk to, well, I'm not going to go down this road. I was going to just talk about definitions of frequency then, but nonetheless,
I just wanted to say
rate is one of the most important dependent variables, so a measure of performance for behavior analysts, so which is response over time. It's just Ogden Lindsley who took that a step further and said, yeah, but we're not just talking about how many responses occur over time, but then within what frame of time. And
so where I was going, Eva, was the fact, so I'm test talking now. We come from the Scandinavian school. We were kind of Kanis trained from the beginning. They had what in Swedish Norwegian is called flytmått, which means that you had a set time in which you measured, you took data of the speed and accuracy of the responses within that set time. We would actually count. And I think that when you said seamlessness and you kind of killed Hannah on that not being seamless, if you can see her wheels grind, I think that for us, what we did was we took fluency of not just of the goal behavior that we're training, but also fluency of getting to.
It's the whole loop.
Oh, froze for a second.
Reward procedure.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the whole it's the whole behavior cycle back to the starting point again.
Exactly. So we have fluency in all the different parts, and that's what we would call seamlessness.
That's required for fluency. From an Ogden Lindsley precision teaching perspective, you have to have the sits. It's number of sits, not sitting. So how many times can you sit and stand up so that you can sit again? So that for our purposes in practical training means we've got to include the green side of the loop, the reinforcement side of the loop. To get back to the starting point.
For practical purposes in my training, I don't.
Are we on the wine track now?
Yes. I don't
I'm always on
typically
the one
count
track.
responses. I'm
Vodka
very
ch-
particular about staying on the one track right now, right?
Yeah.
So in my training session, I'm typically not that bothered about counting the number of completed repetitions. If I get 3 sits or 10 sits within my 30 seconds, that's not how I train. I appreciate the fluency measure and like doing it that way. But what I'm interested in my training is that the path of behavior, event, behavior, event, behavior, event, behavior, event looks like I want it to look. If I put that through a speed test, I should succeed at the speed test.
I think
But
that
typically, I have a lot of other things that I want to do in there. I have things that I want to do with my reward placement, with my reward procedures that might take time, with like there are a lot of things I want to do, right? So I typically don't do the counting.
so.
Yeah. So before you go to whiteboard, I just wanted to say, this is the part that I was talking about within the training community, though. If you are not training to speed, so if you're not training a response to occur as fast as it can, then you are not training to fluency. Whether
So
or
I am
not the
still
behavior is fluent or not. So whether or not the behavior becomes fluent or not still is not training to fluency. So that's the part that I'm saying, is that what the training community is often using is the term fluency in exchange when what they mean is accuracy. So if you're training to accuracy and you get fluency, great. It still you need to test for fluency, but you did not train to fluency. You trained to accuracy and you produced fluency.
Tell me again how you define training to fluency, Eddie.
It has to occur as accurately as fast as possible. That is it. I'm not. So this is. Let's be clear. This is the operational definition of fluency from a behavior analytic perspective.
Yes.
So that's not.
So I'm agreeing on that. I'm not in any way objecting to that. What I'm saying is that what I look for, if I teach the behavior and I teach it to accuracy at speed, yes. Yeah. Then I take the bits and pieces of those repetitions, of the behavior, of the reinforcer, of the cue, of everything, and I put it into the context that is practical for me. But I will look for the same bits and pieces as in the training for proper definition and fluency. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm not I'm not debating whether the behavior is or isn't fluent. I'm just talking about what it means to train to fluency.
Well, I think we can, let's say train for fluency.
Right. Well, train to fluent behavior. Right.
Okay.
So
because I do think, I think that
I'm still confused. What are we talking about? We train to fluent behavior. What is that?
Eva, can I repeat back what I think you're saying and you can check me?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's try to figure this out.
When I'm in a live training session in real time, I don't have a stopwatch and a graph currently.
Sure.
When we have technology, I may. But what I'm looking at moment to moment in that training session is, if I were to pull on one specific thing, it would be how quickly after my dog swallows the treat is he back to doing the behavior again. And that's how I'm making decisions in real time. If I then watch that video back and count the number of sits that happens in a minute and graph that, I should see, let's say I want to graph that on a log scale or semi-log scale. I should see that rate going up, approaching fluency. And, but that's not what I'm making. So I'm separating that, like how I'm measuring it in my record keeping, from how I'm actually making training decisions in the time that I don't have time in the 60 seconds I have my dog on the floor to graph. So I'm gonna do that from video later. And I do think that's valuable. And I do think you're exactly right that we need to be specific, that is accuracy and speed, accuracy and rate of response. And we got to have both, because you can have a lot of shitty sits and it's not a fluent behavior. And I also Furthermore,
That's another question. Do we need behavior to be fluent? Because I'm about to say some things here that precision teacher, standard seller. And by the way, this is part of where I got my start in behavior analysis, was working under Hank Pennypacker at University of Florida as a precision teaching manager. And that's how I learned to graph, was charting with the standard acceleration chart, etc. But that said, and this is one of those things I say to precision teachers, to standard acceleration folk, as I say, is it always to the benefit of the accuracy of performance to train to fluency? So what I want to, but that's a whole other topic. So what I just want to be clear is, so if you are training to occur as fast and accurate as possible, then you are training to fluency. But if you then switch to, I've given the cue, I get the response, and that's what's correct, you are now training to accuracy. You are no longer training to fluency. You can switch between the two. But if you are not requiring the response to occur as fast and accurate as possible, you are not training to fluency in that moment. So let's be clear. That's fluency is defined by accuracy plus speed. The organism has to respond as fast as possible, and there has to be an increase in that responding. You have to require the speed. That is, by definition, what fluency requires.
So Emelie and I, in our writing, wouldn't typically bother about talking about fluency, but what we're looking for, we have used the term intensity a lot to sort of, because we lack a word for what this topography and function is that we're seeing in a speed test, in a fluency testing. The type of behavior, the type of responses that we're seeing there, when we are building, when we're training for that topography and function, all the behaviors going in that path, we're using that as our measure of success. And we want, and we, in the olden days, called that intensity. For us, that does not have to be fast, because it might be that the accuracy we're looking for, it doesn't allow, it can be as fast as it can within that accuracy. And if the accuracy have to do with slow movement,
or not
then
necessarily
per definition,
slow, but a specific movement pattern.
A specific
Trotting through cavaletti versus just galloping through them, holes going everywhere, we're no longer accurate.
Well, intensity, whether we're talking about the trainer or the learner, intensity does not have to mean rushing in any sense. It's going to be defined by the accuracy of. So Eddie.
Yeah. So fluency. I'm thinking about always. Yeah, I was going to say fluency does always include accuracy. And the second thing, and this is the part that I say, and this is the part that would make, Ogden turn in his grave, is fluency, I say, is not the end all be all. As you all were just mentioning, there are times when we want to focus specifically on accuracy. So let's say I learned to play, this is the example that I use. Let's say I learned to play, Stairway to Heaven on the guitar. And I trained fluently. So I learned to play it as fast as possible. Is that necessarily the best way to learn? First off, there's that. Is that necessarily the best way to learn how to play Stairway to Heaven? I would say at least at initial components, probably, to try to play it to get better at the speed that I play. But at some point, does that produce the most accurate version at the speed that I want? That's an empirical question. And that itself is not something that I see addressed by the standard acceleration community very often.
That's a question I've had before, actually. Also, would something like tempo be included in your definition of a correct response? Like if you're way off tempo?
but that's why I say, when I say you are not training to fluency, I am not saying that is a bad thing. I am just saying you are focusing on accuracy.
No.
So that's fine, because
No,
I think
but I'm not.
Right. I'm not talking about you specifically.
Okay. Everyone else. Okay.
Right. Everyone else. No. What I'm saying is that we should stop treating fluency as the end all be all, as if this is the only thing that we are meant to train to, because I think that's part of what has led trainers to replace the term accuracy or good performance with fluent. So as if that is the end all be all. We say, oh, well, this behavior is very fluent. No. You mean it's
I
under
think that would
proper
be wrong.
stimulus control.
I agree with you that would be an incorrect and unhelpful way to use that. I also want to point out something that I think is important for animal training, because I saw the chat went too fast for me, but
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm missing a lot of chat. So
I think we're using the word accuracy, which is often confused with precision. Precision is also often used in dog training, animal training.
Is there a difference?
Yes. There is, in fact, a difference.
Why? How?
Well, I have a whiteboard.
Thank you.
Right. Let's talk about being precise versus accurate. This is the whiteboard is good for this.
I always have a whiteboard. Don't leave home without it. All right. So
I have
breast.
my whiteboard.
What?
I saw a breast, the thing you drew.
That's what Stephanie saw as well. I don't know.
Free the nipple. Yes, there you go.
Well, now
Stephanie.
I'm done. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, precise,
Oh boy.
right?
Yeah.
Accurate.
Oh, so accurate within criteria, precise, like
Exact.
spot on within the center of criteria? Couldn't
And
get any better?
accurate. If an instrument is accurate, it reports the same reading or the same very tight clusters of readings over and over and over again. They may or may not be correct, like on target. Like your thermometer is going to report 36 degrees Celsius, 36 degrees Celsius, 36. A precise but not accurate thermometer might sometimes report 32 degrees Celsius. That's really hot. 8 degrees Celsius. I don't know, whatever.
The breast is hot.
I'm trying real hard with this.
Better at these. I was gonna say I should be better at these things.
You're gonna have to get a lot better at this.
Right.
But isn't necessarily going to report the same reading like over time. It could be scattered. Of course, we want our thermometers to be both accurate and precise. So they're on
But now
target.
I have a huge question to ask regarding
This is, thank you,
fluency
Jason. This is
being-
a target, not a breast. Okay.
fluency being accuracy at speed, because from everything I know of how the term fluency is used, the accuracy that they are talking about
Is then
in
precision.
your term here is precision, correct?
both.
As in precision teaching.
It's
Yeah.
both. What you're
It's-
looking
yeah,
for is
right.
both.
Yeah.
But as a trainer, so then
Yeah,
some trainers are like, well, I'm not, Hannah, I'm not as like uptight as you. I don't care how my dog sits. Well, but you get to define that. So your bullseye could be quite large. But I still think that when I'm observing, even with, I'm trying to, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so I won't use his name, but I'm thinking about some of the really good self-labeled pet dog trainers that are real skilled and get really good, consistent results. They may have a pretty generous definition of precision for the behaviors that they're training, but they're getting really accurate behaviors within that definition. So they're getting behaviors that may be over here, but they're all over here. The behaviors performed in a very consistent manner over and over and over again. So you really probably could draw a tiny bullseye there. I don't think, opinion, wine talking, that if I'm getting a behavior that looks like this, and it's happening all over the place in a really big bubble, that's probably going to turn out to also be fast. And it's probably also going to tend to fall apart, which is why we really care about fluency, because if it's very fast and it's very accurate, I'm a lot more likely to get what I expect to get in the situations where I care.
And so see, but hang on, because already in the chat,
Well, no, I know, but yes.
Already in the chat, I'm seeing that fluency is as fast as possible. That's the point that I'm making, and that's the training community may have they do. The training community has a different they're replacing the term fluent. They're combining them all together. So fluency equals accuracy equals precision. And it's not all I'm less concerned about, and it's an important distinction. For instance, engineers are incredibly interested in differences between accuracy versus precision.
Yes.
And making that distinction. So that can be extremely important. But here, I'm talking about when I'm specifying accuracy here, and that this distinction between accuracy and fluency, and what's happening again. And this is the last time I want to say this, because I don't want to just focus on this, but that fluency does not equal accuracy. That fluency itself means as fast as possible. If you are training to fluency, you are training for a response to occur as fast as possible. That is what you are training to. That's literally what training fluent means. Training to fluent. So.
We got a really good question in the chat.
All of those things. And
Can I refer to?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Can I just refer to the chat? Because Eva is saying, do you mean as fast as possible the behavior, or do you mean with minimal latency? It includes, fluency includes the behavior, but that can only be as fast as your criteria is. So if the criteria is this should take exactly 1 second, or it should look exactly like this, then that's as fast as it can be. But it's also minimal latency. It's also minimal time. It's like minimal time from one response to the next, to the next, to the next.
Kiki asks,
some behaviors, by the way, cannot be trained to fluency.
Sorry about that.
Okay?
Choking on my wine here.
Some behaviors just occur at a particular, so can I train blinking fluent? Maybe, possibly, and then at some sense, do I have this as fluent as I can get blinking to occur, or sneezing, or things of that nature? Some behaviors, as I've already questioned, do you want to train them to fluency? What I want to be clear is that we shouldn't be using the term fluency when we do mean accuracy, particularly when we're training the response. And second, stop treating fluency as if it's the end all be all, as it like oh yeah, oh sure, well, you've got that. Because often what trainers are talking about when they say, well, you have that behavior fluent, is they mean you have it under proper stimulus control. And that's the part that becomes incredibly important. Is yes, when I ask for the response occurs. I'm less concerned about the time frame with which it occurs, although that in and of itself is, I want the response to occur as fast after I deliver the cue or the discriminative stimulus as possible. Yes, okay, but that still does not necessarily describe that behavior may be fluent, as well as, and it has to be accurate and precise. Well, fluency, I'm not going to get into that distinction. But nonetheless, fluency describes a time component, and that's the part that we need to be cautious about using.
I've got 3 things. Hannah, don't even try. I've got 3
I was going
things.
to say, I think Emelie should talk now.
You can say that. I love you.
You made that up, Hannah. You're just trying to get points here.
I love her and she knows it. So I've got 3 things. The first one is the question from Kiki, who says, but will frequency rate necessarily look like speed if the behavior is under stimulus control, happens when cued versus free operant? Go, Eddie.
Say that again, please. Slower.
But will frequency rate necessarily look like speed if the behavior is under stimulus control, happens when cued versus free operant?
Yeah, so you're in here, if you're talking about discrete trials in this sense, right? So when I present the cue and the response happens as fast as possible under this condition, as opposed to the behavior can occur freely under conditions where no discriminative stimuli are necessarily, so it can occur in non-discrete trial form, right? So lever pressing. So so we can say a behavior is fluent based on how fast it occurs after the presentation of a cue. That I think that is fine. I guess so. Yeah, I mean, we're going to describe it in terms of its rate of response to the cue in that sense, and then whether it can occur in a free operant. I don't know, in the absence of the cue. We're not necessarily comparing the two
We're
directly.
never in the absence of a cue.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm
But
just thinking.
you don't have a waiting for the cue. That's the difference.
yeah, it's if you're not waiting for the cue. Kiki says high frequency
So-
discrete trials is per opportunity, not per minute. That's my
Yeah.
understanding.
I was
as well.
asking about this when I was in last time when I was in Seattle, which feels like a very long time ago.
That was at least
we were
8 years ago.
At least. Maybe
Everything
10.
was
At
8 years
least.
ago or yesterday. I don't really have a different way to discriminate.
This was not yesterday. I can assure you. So it must have been 8 years ago. It
Yes.
might have been January actually.
Yeah.
But still.
So
January 8 years ago.
I was asking Joanne Robbins about this because they work so much with frequency, with fluency measures at Morningside, and we were asking about like, so how do you do? Because it's going to be different if you have one
Right.
child reading to another child the question. The rate of responding per minute is going to be different depending on the speed that the question is read at. And from my understanding, there are techniques to level that out so that, as Kiki is saying, you measure it as
per opportunity. So
per opportunity rather than per minute.
yeah,
And then it gets a bit closer to what we are often looking for in our animal training, I think. But also, we are looking for more. There is something in this when we talk about frequency that is so oriented to the response we're after. In our animal training, to loop back again to that location-specific marker, we're looking for not only do I want the behavior to occur in the fashion that I'm looking for, but I want all the aspects of my training session to occur in sort of fashions that are beneficial for my training, including the reward procedure. And that then again, either we will have to look at fluency of the reward procedure behaviors, or we just skip, as you sort of suggest there, Eddie. Let's not necessarily talk about fluency. Let's instead go into looking at what is it that we're looking for. Never mind what we call it, just what is it that we're looking for and how can we get there?
That's the part that I want to hear about, is that unfortunately, and this is something that occurs often within I think the training community, is we see a term that's used to describe something that's desirable, and so we just fit that term to describe what we're doing. So somebody says, well,
that's marketing, and it's
very important.
Very important.
I keep hearing people talk about fluent behavior, so I'm going to describe.
I want some of that. Give me some of that fluent behavior.
Yeah. Yep. I've got fluency, and but there's no speed component. So Stephanie brought up a couple points here, which was about the definitions and redefining things. And I don't. Cooper talks about, so the behavior analysts in general have used the term frequency a little different than sometimes how it's defined outside of the behavior analytic literature, in that frequency has been used interchangeably with rate. Otherwise, frequency often just simply means count. Behavior analysts use both those terms. I tend to use, I did it even earlier where I was using frequency in exchange of rate. But the key component here is to then define the term itself. And every field deals with some deviation between terms. But fluency itself, and this is how fluency is defined, this is pretty standard within the behavior analytic world and within behaviorism itself. So we're not talking about a deviation of a definition that really differs with across behavior analysts or behaviors and many other scientists. So that's what I've got.
Oh, the silence.
So
that was my question number one, was Kiki's question. My question number two is, Eva, do we do accuracy or do we only do precision? I'm still confused.
we want both.
Well, I mean, just when we're talking about, you know, when we say attitude, direction, precision, are we talking about precision or are we talking about accuracy?
I'm still a little bit lost at accuracy. Sorry.
No, I screwed that one up, but the concept is the same. You should just not listen to me. But I tell you that all the time.
And we keep listening. So apparently your verbal behavior doesn't have that much control over.
When I get
our
excited, my verbal
responses
behavior loses both precision and accuracy.
And everything else. Okay.
So
and
I
social
would
propriety.
I would think, from my understanding, that I am looking for precision in terms of I'm looking at all the aspects of the behavior. I'm looking at the topography. I'm looking at the latency. I'm looking at the speed. I'm looking at all those topographies of behavior, and I have like a set image in my mind of what I want it to look like. But it might be. So what I'm training, yes, Jason, exactly. So since precision refers to single behavior, and I am typically working with
single behavior.
With single behaviors, it might be that it would be beneficial for my training sometimes to work more at what I, in my language, talking Swedish, translating to English, would call reliability. So that's my question here to the English speakers here. What's the difference between accuracy and reliability? Or do those two relate? Like I want you to
so I guess another way you
sort of
could
the same every single time.
Say it like, so if accuracy is correct or not correct. Let me see if I can not get myself tangled up this time. Correct or not correct.
So,
and you're interested in correct a lot of the time.
That's reliability.
Right. Or
is it
repeatable.
accuracy?
The same response over and over and over.
Accuracy goes.
Water,
that would be precise.
Shoot me now, people.
So I guess maybe sort of my question, so you're thinking about, does the bar stay up? Does the jump happen fast? And is your dog facing the right direction?
Yeah, and I'm guessing if I was working with something like scent detection, like drug detection, where it was, or say I'm working with my recalls out in the woods, or my recalls with my chicken that I had to practice today at numerous occasions because there were chicken everywhere. I just want to make sure that I get the behavior reasonably every single time I ask for it. So you're saying then I'm looking for the label accuracy. I'm not that particular about precise. Yes, we want it precise. I'm not that interested in the precision of the behavior. It can be anywhere within these criteria. I just want it to happen. But I think you want it to happen every single time.
But I think you can define it like you get to, for our behaviors, which are not necessarily measurable in inches or degrees. Like what is a correct response? Like it is either correct or not correct. Their math problem is you get the right answer, you don't get the right answer. It's not a close enough answer. And for something like, so some things are more obvious. Your dog goes over the jump, but the bar stays up. A correct response compared to your dog goes through the jump, but the bar does not stay up. would be not a correct response. Like, that's not what you're training for. Like, and you may make different choices in the moment as far as what you reinforce or reward or whatever. Other behaviors get more fuzzy. So one of the ones where I spend most of my time, like obedience, two of the places where we run into a lot of trouble are things like front and heel position. Because in the moment, the trainer is trying to decide if that response meets criteria. Is he close enough? Is he straight enough? And as soon as you're asking yourself, is this enough? And the dog has already done the behavior, the ship has sailed. Whether you reinforce, reset, whatever, the behavior has already occurred. So clearly defining for yourself what is correct versus incorrect, what's clickable, what's not clickable.
Meeting criteria or not meeting criteria.
Meets criteria, not meets criteria, because they're not all, like some of our behaviors should still be very definable, but they're not going to be definable in the same way that a thermometer is. It's going to it'd have a different way of defining it, but just as important to be consistent with what you're reinforcing.
So do I practically need this distinction of accuracy versus precision? When might I need, like, I don't need the words, but what is under them? When might they be useful for me?
I think you could take both of them with just fluency. Because if it's accurate and fast, then you're
with a spoonful of sugar, just take it.
Let's just, if you are setting your criteria, so, and part of this has to, you can talk about response generalization here, but if you are setting your criteria, you're setting your criteria to get both accuracy and precision. So that's at that point because of how you set your criteria. So
can you say that with words that are not labeled? Is that possible?
Yeah. So
God, Eva.
So no. But particular terms are necessary for describing the behavior. We could say that the behavior is occurring at criteria, and then that's enough. That's what we get for describing. I mean, if we want to talk about the variability of the response itself and what level of variability in responding I'm getting, so that I'm getting accurate but not okay, but now when I change my criteria, I have defined where it meets that. So criteria ends up, and what we're defining as that variability in responding is where we get more particular about this.
Mm-hmm. So I think two things here. One, the accuracy and speed matters for when we're raising criteria, because if we get a correct response in a 10-minute long, too long training session, this is not the time to raise criteria. And that is, I think, exactly where trainers, like there's a trap there for trainers to get the thing to happen and then be ready to raise criteria. And I think including speed in there helps us making practical training decisions. You guys, well, seamlessness would be just another way to look at it, right? Like, you know, is the loop clean? If the loop is clean, not only can you move on, should you move on? And I think the other thing I wanted to say, if I remember, I need to write this shit down, is that one of the reasons this is helpful is that if we are looking at applying a label of confidence, behaviors that are performed accurately and with a lot of speed are going to read as confident. Like, take yourself out of the, can I guess what my dog is feeling?
Yeah.
If you look at a video of a dog performing a correct response with speed to meet our technical definition of fluency, we are going to label that as confident compared to the same dog performing the same behavior more slowly.
Yeah.
Yes.
That.
And that is what somebody might get from using that location specific marker, but somebody else might get it from a different strategy, which is why I personally don't use that many location specific markers.
Can somebody
I have
give me
different strategies
examples
to get the same thing.
Can somebody just kind of give me like 3 examples of location specific markers?
My dog is moving ahead of me. She's walking in front of me, and I say varsågod. She looks down. I toss a treat. Every time I say varsågod, which is you're welcome in Swedish, she will look down, and that's where the treat's appearing. It's location specific. It's a marker because I use it like functionally as a marker. As she's walking in the gate I am looking for. I
and
can
the
use it
location has to do with where the whatever she's expecting is turning
yes,
up.
where whatever she's expecting is turning up.
So
if I would go tis or yip, she would
snap
turn
around
back
towards
to me.
you.
And I could have those to be different. So I could have tis for it shows up on your right side, so she looks that way. I could have yip to be it shows up on your left side, so she snaps back.
Yeah. So
I have very few of these, but yeah.
I would just say so. I have very few as well. That's why I'm kind of asking. And an angle of this that I know maybe beyond the scope of this conversation is, how about the trainer perspective?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
That crap. I mean, like Hannah was just saying, we're trying to figure out a lot of stuff within the containment of a training session, even if we're doing it in like small, short little bursts. You do have it. Okay, good. I'll just start drinking more vodka before I train. I'm probably more fluent in my markers. Yeah, cheers.
Accurate, precise.
Went off a different direction there for a second.
You meet criteria in your markers, Emelie?
What do you?
Which are you more fluent in your markers, or you're more
accurate?
Crap!
I did not mean that. I meant being capable of uttering the correct marker when I am looking for a certain
meeting criteria.
I mean, that's a separate thing, right? Like, but also valid.
It is valid. I mean,
it's hugely valid.
I think that even if that might be a wonderful idea, I have to consider, can I uphold it? Will I be upholding it? And when I look at if we look at an obedience session, Hannah,
yes.
Do you or do you not feel that people have enough going on as it is?
Okay, let me just cue up a soapbox. This will be faster.
It's here. Go.
I'm wearing the wrong shirt. But let's say, let's just
any day now.
The stronger your reinforcement strategies are, the more effective your training is going to be. So timing, efficacy here. It's the reinforcer that matters. Cueing it helps, but your dog is going to be responding to whatever is the best predictor that reinforcement is coming. So the most important thing we can focus on is our mechanics first. Get that perfect, because you can have 60 words, but if your mechanics are inconsistent, they won't matter.
I think you said it just more beautifully. That's kind of what I mean. Are you going to take the time to get your mechanics?
Your mechanics.
Crap, I can't say fluent.
That matters.
Your mechanics.
That matters no matter what.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That matters no matter what. But
no matter what.
Do I try for the sake of being pragmatic? That is a word.
It is a word.
It is definitely a
being
word.
Pragmatic. Should I? Good. Let's roll with that one then. I am test talking here now. I'm thinking, should I be really, really good at fewer things than trying to incorporate more things?
And I think that that's a reasonable thing to ask yourself as a trainer. Yeah. That's
an excellent question. Another question that I want to bring up, and this relates back to Emelie, our most intense agility days. If I'm going to use discriminative stimulus, if I'm going to use a ton of them to discriminate between it's a ball coming to the left, it's a treat coming in front of you, it's a ball coming to the right, it's 75 degrees angle,
whatever,
5 meters out, whatever, then I should make sure that there are not other aspects that are cueing the behavior.
Exactly.
Because then I might as well use the other. It's the same as when you're running on the agility course and you're going jump, jump, tunnel. And I'm like, Why?
Mm.
Is it so that the dog shouldn't take the jump if you're not saying jump? What should the dog do if you say nothing and you do, and everything else is the same?
Yeah, or if
Because
you
what
lose
we
your
end up doing is we're fooling ourselves into thinking that we have one cue that gives the behavior, but as a matter of fact, there might be a different cue or a combination of cues. And we
I think that's true for training
time to train them.
Universally, specifically
Yeah.
applied to verbal cues.
Yeah.
In particular,
Yeah.
we have a lot more value in our verbal cues than like anybody else. So I think that that's a reasonable question.
So
that doesn't mean that I'm opposed to verbal cues or
me neither. I was just wondering.
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves that question, which is why I like to tie it back to the behavior rather than like location specific markers is like it has become like a trademark thing, and I don't think it's helpful. I think that's an unhelpful label because it gets people real hung up on where the thing is placed, and that shouldn't be how you make your decisions in your training.
It gets hard for me to keep track of all the recent terms that are branded within training procedures, whether, and often when I see them, it's, am I going to dare say this right now? Yes, I am. It's like the least reinforcing scenario or least. I
told you I wasn't going to talk about that.
Right. So in other words, timeouts. Or differential, reinforcement with a punishment procedure. So not extinction, but it's just rebranding of what already exists within. So location-specific markers, tertiary reinforcers, all of these things, whether, like people are just rebranding something that already exists. And if we're talking about the use, so to what extent are we, and you can correct me please do correct me if I'm getting some aspect wrong here. But if we're talking about using different types of reinforcers for different responses or contexts, even. Mm-hmm. So there is literature on this topic in particular. So there's things. Mm-hmm. I've talked about this often in terms of, I think I unleashed a bit of a demon here when I started talking about differential outcome effect and how that relates to some of this, because now I'm starting to see that pop up a lot more within the training community, except I think people are talking about it instead now as justification for what they already did, rather than to understand what the effect actually is.
Are we talking about food pellet versus sugar water, or?
I mean, we're talking about in any setting, really any use of any type of reinforcer to distinguish between two different responses. So
no, okay, I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay, so sit gets you a hot dog and down gets you pizza. Yeah. Oh God, why did I say pizza? I don't know.
You're
whatever.
Hungry.
Yeah. So this is
Eddie, I think there is another layer to the location-specific marker in addition to what you're describing, and that is to have a cue that is used as a timing tool and as a transitioning from the behavior you're looking for to the behavior associated with a reward. So that aspect, I understand where the word location specific marker is coming from. I'm not aware of another term that is indicating the same thing in terms of being a cue that we also pragmatically use as a marker and that specifies what you just described.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, I know very little about this concept, and it sounds like something that has at least some potential utility. In describing some procedure, I cannot speak to the procedure itself. So that's all I'm saying. I just want to be clear about what these things are, and then be cautious also. I mean, it is my nature as a scientist to be skeptical of any of where the utility of some particular concept or term is, especially this is the part that I say I'm wary of, and there are two things that I am often very wary or skeptical of within the animal training community, which is when things get branded or the branding of things, and also when we start trainers or particular individuals as gurus. That in and of itself is another problem.
Well,
So,
it is, and yet we have to make a living, and that shit sells. So
Exactly.
I don't know. I find
So,
myself in a
you're
real
right. And
bad
that's the
position.
point that
Nobody wants to buy use specific cues to signal different reinforcement procedures.
I know. Do you know that we were working in 15 years on start button procedures before we decided on a specific time? Okay, we're doing this presentation. Let's consistently use this term and see if we can get the concept to fly, because we can't get the concept to fly. And then we use that term in one presentation, and the term went flying. And
you bought that URL, right? I assume.
And I'm like,
I hope so.
And it's
sure.
It's reinforcing for people.
Don't like that happens. I hate that happens, because it's the concept, it's what's underlying, it's what we're doing, it's the actions, it's the ABCs.
Don't be bitter that you're bad at marketing.
Right.
Like that.
Right. We've talked about
marketing. I sold the start button.
We've talked about that term though too, and I think it's a useful term to identify an important feature. So when we talk about what you all do with start buttons, I mean, we can talk about it as a conditional discrimination, but there's but it's a particular type of conditional discrimination that is a choice-driven conditional discrimination, and there is nothing else to describe that procedure quite accurately. So I think start button is fine. There's another similar term that I've said this as well too, because look, when I started talking about using treating after each delivery of a conditioned reinforcer, and I was calling that non-one-to-one versus one-to-one treat click rates, and that's the way I was describing it. It took years later that Susan Friedman took my concept and rebranded it as blazing clickers, and blazing clicker is a great accurate way to describe that, so that's why I've jokingly referred to it as a cover song of this concept that I thought was important, and it's a cover song that's better than the original.
Oh, there we go. Hey peeps, it's 8 minutes to 10 here in Sweden, and I've got mommy duties in the morning at 6 a.m. So I'm just letting you know that I am fascinating. I can probably do this all night, but I will be wrapping up in a little bit.
Agreed. I'm on the same
mommy duty
timeline.
Schedule.
Yeah, except mine is
have a
increasingly walking in here.
I have a 6 a.m. date with my sister going swimming in the ocean for a very short period of time, just saying.
I feel not sorry for you.
It sounds terrible.
Great. But I had a question. We had a question from Emma.
Good for you, Stephanie.
Yeah. I wanted to address more questions coming in here from chat. So
there was a question from Emma. I'm still looking for it. She was trying to specify her question. It's far up here now, and it had to do with, what is it? Oh, Eddie, pick something if I can't find it. The chat is long.
We can talk just briefly about stimulus control when we're talking about responses generalizing.
Yes, please tell us the difference between what. God,
I forgot. I have a note. It's not in the chat. I have a note and I just need to say this. So there is something that's similar between the differential outcome effect and the location-specific marker.
Yes.
In that we are talking about reward specificity, and that I miss that when we talk about stimulus control, like the reward specificity is missing, and that goes with the start button concept as well, where we're talking about consequence specificity. It's late, I can't say that. Eddie, can you say something, or somebody say something about this reward specificity thing and why there are so few precise terms for it in our literature?
Well, I mean, like I said, this is something that's existed within the experimental literature so the experimental analysis of behavior, EAB. So when I throw that acronym out there, EAB, this is literally the basic off the laboratory research done within behavior analysis. That's what experimental analysis of behavior is. Often with pigeons, most often with pigeons, although there's plenty of translational research with humans, and then there's research with rats as well. But operant guys tend to use pigeons in the lab. And a lot of the early stuff that was coming out in, the 70s and whatnot on differential outcome effect was just that simple. It was, hey, we're looking at a discrimination, this stimulus discrimination between two tasks. So under, a red light for this pigeon, there's two different keys. You have one schedule of reinforcement. Red light is one schedule of reinforcement. Green light is the other schedule of reinforcement. So we can talk about something like a variable interval schedule of, this amount of time versus that amount of time. And you get faster ability to discriminate between the schedules. So the performance more quickly discriminates when you use two different types of rewards for that discrimination task. Now later, so that's what's known as the differential outcome effect. Later, people like Ron Schusterman started using this with sea lions, and he was using this to get part of effects of what was called like stimulus equivalence. Okay, that he was able, and this becomes important because now we're talking about matching to sample kind of stuff that's happening here, which is really, it can get really tricky. So, but so if we're talking about matching, oh wow, do I get to bring out penguins? I do. Okay, matching to sample. Here we go, 2 penguins. So if I have a sample stimulus, I'm going to present. Here's your sample stimulus, and all of a sudden, often this is done with 3 different stimuli. Now I present these 2. You are expected to match to sample. So you pick that one. So this one comes up. Then I present these 2. You're expected to make that. So depending, we can talk about the discriminations that are trained there and different differences that occur there as well. And I can get these discriminations to occur faster if I use different rewards. That's the simple concept. Now, there have been points where trainers have talked about, oh, this is not useful or it is useful. And a lot of these arguments have been made. And that's where I've stopped and said, hang on, we need to go back to, in fact, there was one point where I think even in his newest book, Ken was talking about using different rewards and their ineffectiveness so using different types of markers. And I got what he was trying to say there, because this has become common within the training community, where you see things like marine mammal trainers that they were like, oh, I use a different whistle marker for each different response that I require. So it's, oh, I'm using this one for that and this one for that. And you can see how quickly convoluted it gets. And that's part of what Hannah was addressing, where she was saying, you're using all these different markers for all these different things. And what is the purpose of that? And I think, yes, there's not great data to support that. But the simple concept of using different rewards for at least a simple discrimination, there is data to support that.
Anecdotally, I agree.
Yeah, me too. And a practical, really like an issue that a lot of trainers have is the discrimination between like verbal cues for sit, down, and stand. And this is like a practical thing since ages ago of using different reward procedures for the 3 of them, because that fixes that problem. If the cue is, if the ABC goes with each cue for each behavior goes to as much difference in the reward as possible, anecdotally from many years of experience, says that it works.
Yeah, now here's one of the tricks though. And by the way, in some of the research that's been done out of Minnesota, and I'm blanking on the researcher's name, but he has done a ton of stuff on differential outcome effects. And here's one of the tricks, is one of the problems that occurs with this is that and this is some of the stuff that people like Schusterman have found as well, is when you remove the differential consequences, the discrimination in many cases goes away as well. So that there is actually the use of the different consequences is part of what allows the organism to discriminate.
I was going to say, does that start is that where it becomes part of the cue for the next response? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, it's not clear what it is that what exactly is. That's part of what some of the research has done to investigate, is identifying what's being discriminated. What I can tell you is the effect, the ability to make the discrimination largely goes away without any other training if you do not, once you remove the differential rewards.
Yeah.
Which makes perfect sense, because
exactly.
we think
it does tend to be a separate training. We solve it initially, and then we have a whole separate training stage to remove it. So yeah.
Right.
I mean, behavior in general is for its function, right? So
So if you change the
behavior
function,
is topography. You change the function, you change everything.
Yeah.
So we need to be cautious about this. Is one of those reasons why it's often you have to be careful about what you provide. And I know, I've spent a number of years talking to trainers about where there might be utility for differential outcome effect, similar to talking to trainers about some of the utility in talking about, behavioral economics. And unfortunately, I've seen aspects of that where it seems like people just take a little bit and run away.
Yeah.
So they're like, now this is how I do this and this is how I do that, or worse, where you see trainers that have been using a procedure to justify what they've already been doing.
That is what I am usually looking to do.
To justify what you've already been doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is my ideal situation.
I was just going to say, we already know about the review article that I had to turn down, and we were saying we weren't going to get into that topic at all. So we can't go to that in and of itself. I had to sit there and do I even dare say this? Or we're 2 hours in.
You have opened that door, Eddie.
I know.
What are you going to do now?
I actually got asked to review a paper, and this is we were avoiding this topic as much as possible. I got asked to review a paper that was on bestiality. So simply put, so the
eyebrows on this Zoom screen.
Yeah, what they call sexual human-animal interactions. The prevalence within society of, I can't remember the exact title, but it was anthropological is what it was. It was sociological, the approach that they were taking, which was to look at this. But nonetheless, somehow some editor saw that one of my levels of expertise is on human-animal interactions, and in their title was sexual human-animal interactions. So they said, this guy can review the paper for us. And I said, yeah, no, I can't. It is not, I have no expertise in this, as much as I love to tell stories about, penguins humping people's hands in zoos, like Cookie at the Cincinnati Zoo, which we got into in your podcast, Hannah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If anyone's seen the viral video, now I'm just going down this rabbit hole. If anyone's seen the viral video of the penguin laughing when it's being tickled, that's a penguin trying to hump that person's hand. It's Cookie at the Cincinnati Zoo. That penguin is humping, and that's what's going on there.
So back to Emma's question.
Yeah.
Peter the dolphin. I am really, really sorry, Emma. I would have loved to answer your question, but I actually really have to go at this point. And Eddie ended this on penguin boobs and Peter the dolphin and sexual interactions.
I was waiting to see where was going to be the opportunity to throw this in here, and ended with.
And it took you 2 hours?
And it took you 2 hours. You're such a rookie.
Losing fluency.
Anyways.
Hi, Teresa. Good night, Teresa.
Teresa popped in for a second. Hi.
We started on penguin boobs for God's sake.
You know what? We had penguin boobs, and I didn't even fall for that bait. And then it just took, but now everyone's going to YouTube that video. I'm telling you, if you look at the video of the penguin being tickled, That's cookie, and that is
So-
not being tickled.
Housekeeping question. Is there any way, Eddie and Hannah, you technical people, is there any way that we can copy the chat? And actually, I mean, there were questions that we never got around to, like, at all.
Actually, yes. I believe I can download it as a file.
Yep.
Cool. Save chat. Thank you, Steph.
And yes, I can and download it.
I don't know if
Then
we will have the
might
opportunity.
get back to some
I
of
want
this
to
at
answer
some
Emma's
point.
damn question.
Okay, let's
before
go,
we hang
Hannah.
up.
Let's
Oh.
not end it. Let's not end it on penguins being tickled for sex. Let's just not end it there. So
Let's think of something else.
So Emma's question
Anything else?
she was so good to post it again, and she said, what I'm currently seeing from my dog in the scent discrimination training is vocalization, whine or whimper when I give a reinforcement reward. What I like to see is quietness from her. More than anything, my dog appears to enjoy the scent discrimination training very much, so much so she happily will alert to target odor when it's in fact not there. My hope is encouraging more calmness that she could discriminate with more focus. Using Zen treats for reinforcement tend to result in more undesirable vocalizations. Is that the one you were want to play with? Well,
So my first question would be, when does desired reward procedure behavior occur? Like, what different reward procedures do we have, and under which conditions, like outside of scent discrimination, when do we get the calm reward procedure behavior that we're looking for? That would be interesting to look at.
and well, Eva, I have like an agility related example of this. Is calm something that we're going to think that we're going to get? I mean, like, it sounds like
Not interested.
We can get quiet.
Not
What
if-
if
we can
I'm
get
interested
quiet,
in
but
quiet.
I'm interested in quiet, but I would like to take the notion of the label of calmness out of there, because it rubs me the wrong way.
Let's go for a seamless reward procedure that is precise and accurate and whatever you want it to be.
Yes, and then split the behavior fine. Make sure you have that in other settings, and split the behavior fine enough. And
Reward
then go.
behavior we're talking about now. Reward
Yes.
behavior.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I've worked through this actually, and I can tell you it originally started because I was a little late.
Yeah, that's normally where it goes.
Right. And so I was a little late, got a little bit of vocalization. The way that I have talked about it, Eddie, just cover your ears.
Yeah, take the reward procedure.
wait.
out.
I was the one that was saying approximations. Come on.
Take
No.
a huge sip, Eddie. Big gulp. There you go.
Was that the original vocalization was respondent, right? It was frustration because I was slow and all of the things. And then it became operant, and that it just got layered in.
Hannah, trigger warning. You said Eddie should close his
Cover
ears.
your
and
ears
I'm
too.
sitting and I'm totally like, they hurt now.
I know. I'm wine drinking now.
Rose too.
Wine talking. It's the
wait,
wine talking.
Did I have to cover my ears because I would disagree with that, or because you didn't want me like elaborating? This is the part that I'm having a problem discriminating.
We just didn't
So,
want to shock your sensitivities, is what she's saying.
my narrative was that initially my being a little bit slow. I think even I have put this behavior like in an extinction condition. So the way they were I'm wine talking here. So I'm just gonna tell you my narrative. The story I make up about this is that I was a little bit slow. My
Renee?
dog got frustrated. She vocalized because she was frustrated. And then even later on, when I was a little bit better and I was no longer late, the conditions of lateness were no longer existed, but I kept reinforcing while she was vocalizing. And so then it became, I start to walk towards her. She starts to vocalize. And at least, I don't know, Emma, about your dog, but my dog also would do this with her front feet, which also irritated me. And then what happened was it just kept leaking forward up the timeline until the point where she would start to vocalize and patter her feet. And I didn't even have to mark. And it just, the whole cue that we're doing a scent related exercise, this became part of the behavior. So at that point I started calling it operant. It's all operant. But that was helpful for me because then the training strategy that I employed was, well, shit, I got to get all of these cues out of the picture to get a clean behavior. I could not have scent targets. I couldn't have any of the containers that I would use scent art, because I did this to her in both a nose work setting and in an obedience scent discrimination setting. Same behavior. It's like the same person was training both. I don't know why.
I do
So what
want
we
to.
want to do is think back chaining.
Right. Exactly. Take it from there, please. Eva.
I don't need to say anything more. Think back chaining. Like, give the reward, add looks of like shape, or do whatever prompt, do things that makes the reward behavior look like you want it to. Then add the cue, which is the marker, and then add the behavior that goes before the marker, that is the scent discrimination thing. And that might, we might opt for as often when got an undecided behavior on cue in a specific scenario. Or can we work with a different reward procedure on a different cue so that we like change around as many things as possible? That's probably would be my go-to.
Yeah, try to go to a
Work from
completely
that.
fresh picture that we haven't screwed up yet.
Yeah.
And can I, so for my purposes in this context, I really wanted to be able to get the food as close to my dog as I could. But I needed
And
to
then
do
you
that
just then you just really split it fine, right?
yeah, I had to start, oh gosh, how did I had it like, I'm trying to remember, she's no longer with us, but I had to start with her like here.
We've got the dolls and the penguins out now.
So like zero distance, and then work my way till I could be like here, and then eventually here. And then vary my position around. So like initially I am sitting on the floor in front of her at zero distance. And can I just get the food there before she started? It's like this high frequency monkey.
Annoyed.
Yeah. And so like as close as possible, got that clean. And then just inch by inch, can I change my angle until I'm not facing her anymore? And then could I be immediately behind her and she would stay on the article? And then could I vary my distance as well as my angle? And I'm trying, if I remember, this was years ago, and I screwed it up like 3 times and had to start over like 3 times to fix it. Because like you get like 2/3 of the way and then you fuck up in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm like in my hallway because it's like the last room in the house that I haven't associated with this behavior. And then finally bring in the, like, I happen to have the bag that we usually use when we're doing scent work on the bench, generally in the room with us. And we're still playing this just game where you just wait quietly and food comes to you and it's not a big deal. It was not easy. So I do not dismiss your challenges in any way.
Can I also say that for me, what comes up, and I'm definitely on the wine track here now, not the water glass, but what comes up to me when people start to say calmness to me, that normally means that the thing that goes on before the behavior is very, very unclear to the dog. There isn't a set starting point. There isn't a starting point from where the dog can begin to work. There's a lot of stuff going on beforehand, and the dog isn't clear on what we're trying to accomplish, and it gets muddled up and we get frustration, whimpering.
Yes.
Sure. And
working for calmness often looks like extinction conditions.
Yes,
and
which is why calmness is not a thing. And also, if we have a learner that's like any of my dogs, or like Hannah, or like myself, trying to get us to speak slowly or move slowly and kind of have calmness as a thing, that's not going to be productive in any way. That's just going to be, so that's not what I'm looking for. If Scout wants to act like a little volcano thing next to me, as long as she is, holy crap, is it precise or accurate?
We don't need to go down that road again. Don't worry about
actually
it.
Meeting criteria,
exactly.
Emelie. Meeting criteria.
As long as she's meeting criteria. She can be a volcano.
Truth. And that's I think that's I mean, Emma should feel picked on now.
That's not what we're doing. We're just finding the things that we're
I say the same thing, and I think that you're right. When my dogs are frustrated, it's usually because I was sucking as a trainer. And that continues.
It's like we have our trainer brains on, and we know what we're going to be working on, and we have a set starting point on our heads, and sometimes we just fail to communicate that or set up the structure that kind of makes that clear to our learner as well.
And
that's
I
not
think,
us being
and I think is in the larger, just to pick on calmness a little bit more separate from Emma,
because we hate it. I have
in
to
the
go to
larger
bed.
training community, calmness usually also means not moving, like it usually means stationary, and that's often achieved through a lot of negative reinforcement.
So am I saying that this dog is a service dog, so
Service
she
dog.
can't quite have the volcano? We could say that if the volcano meets criteria of service dog work, so
Then she is
it
a
might
volcano
be
service dog.
that, yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah,
I-
yeah, because I think it
do-
will typically help
Well,
the
I
dog.
think what Emma's saying is she needs a
Be more
clean loop
precise.
where she's got
Yeah,
criteria on
Yes.
both sides, the behavior
yeah.
and the reinforcer.
Yeah.
None of that can involve magma.
training to criteria.
Yeah,
Or
so there's
lava.
something interesting.
I guess it could be magma.
There's something, Hannah, what you were describing earlier, and I do want to point this out because there's one thing, I think there is a particular difficulty we can run into when we get into all this level of training. And it's something people like Bob Bailey have brought up before as well. And he reminds trainers of this, is that I think there's this temptation to treat all behavior as if it was operantly conditioned. There's a temptation to have only that one tool in our belt. And so, Hannah, when you were describing you were saying, I want you to close your ears, stop listening. And you were mentioning respondent behavior, but you were getting at the fact that some of this may have been elicited. And then on top of that, may have been conditioned respondently, which is not absurd by any means, because we have respondent conditioning occurring all the time if we're just using food rewards. The operant guys got this, and it took concepts like auto shaping and adjunctive behavior to remind them that, and some of them still miss it, but to remind them that there is stuff happening other than just operant behavior whenever you are using rewards. And this is why Bob Bailey says things like Pavlov is always on your shoulder. So that's what he's getting at, is that there are things happening. You can elicit behavior as well as the fact that behavior is emitted. It's important to remember those concepts. So, and that can happen even just based on the type of consequences you use. So I say this to keep in mind that, yeah, you know, it's good to know not just about the timing and of events and consequences and et cetera, but also to keep in mind that, you know, who are you working with in terms of the organism, and what are some of the other conditions involved?
And in addition to that, what I find is so often missing, and what is the case in this scenario, I would be guessing, is that there is behavior coming from the contingencies. Extinction contingencies will produce. It's like I don't have the vocabulary for. It's not elicited necessarily, or maybe it is, I don't know, but it's produced by the contingency. Extinction conditions produce a lot of crappiness that then gets sort of built into the behavior chain. So
It's
Hannah, when you were saying you looked at it as
That's a technical term.
respondent,
I was just
I would
a
say
water glass term. Yes.
Yeah.
totally. We can have 3 different ones. One for if it's like repeatedly looks the same every single time, and one for if it's like extremely crappy versus not so crappy.
Yeah, no, I think crappiness is
All the possibilities.
legit, and extinction related crappiness is TM.
I think the term you were looking for was fluently crappy. So whether
We can have fluent crappy
That's it.
behavior. That's true.
That's it.
That's true.
I think crappy behavior is often very fluent, actually, if we test for
Emily's
it.
trying to
Yes.
leave.
Yeah, I am trying to leave.
Oh,
I'm
I know.
trying
I
to,
mean, if
like,
you're just looking
I'm
at rate of response,
I-
crappy behavior is faster to get fluent, easier to get
Yes.
fluent.
Are
Anyway.
you kidding me?
Yeah.
I am Brexiting. I'm so Brexiting to this. I'm like, I'm in.
So are we? Do we?
Emily's exit is non-fluent.
I guess I guess that's the question, though.
Not
is,
precise.
And not seamless at all.
are we ending this as a? Do we want to stop here? Is this something that we stop, or are we just allowing? Or is Emily on her way out the door and we
Well,
are?
I will have to leave to go also parent. Unfortunately.
Is this something that we stop, or are you just going to live on Zoom?
I mean, we can do
for
it
like
to be
ever?
continued.
Right,
Like we
right.
can meet up and record a podcast. We can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
should do it, 4 of us on a podcast. That would be fun.
That'd be a
Oh, my God.
disaster. But okay.
We're gonna have to have some scripts at some level.
We would
We-
have to have a script.
It'll be fluently disastrous.
Fine.
I think we did pretty well here. We were really great at turn taking. I want to give out those rewards to everybody involved here. There was, even with the wine, there was a lot of great turn taking.
Impressive, wasn't it? Yeah, I think this was really fun.
I'm
I
patting
think that
myself on the back there too, by the way. So
That should be the definition of fluency: accurate at wine.
Precise at wine.
Precise as wine. Sorry.
What are the neurotransmitters involved in that? That's
I'm not always the best turn taker.
Trigger warnings, Hannah. Trigger warnings. No, I'm not that triggered by neurotransmitters anymore.
I would argue.
That you're lying through your teeth.
No, because I had wine.
Different complement of biochemistry.
I think Stephanie is trying to be very precise here. I don't know.
Well, then if we're ending it for all of us, I will say this was incredibly awesome. Thank you for everyone showing up. We had a lot of people today, a lot. I thought we were gonna, we were getting into triple digits there. I thought we
Wow.
get there. I didn't quite get there. I think our max was like in the 80 something, but it was impressive.
I hope
so a
people
lot
didn't
of
expect us to accomplish anything, but
No, I know. I'm not sure we accomplished anything, but nonetheless, it was enjoyable. I liked
I
it.
think so.
It was enjoyable. I enjoyed it, and I think it was fun.
It's the journey, not the destination anyway, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
life is a journey towards death and all that.
I mean,
So maybe we'll do something more.
we have
I
to
don't
make it
know.
until November, those of us in the US.
Yeah. Oh, please don't remind me. I'm trying to get to Australia. Australia, I'm coming for you. I swear. We've been waiting 4 months now. The government will approve me getting in there. Hopefully.
As long as you're sending in your vote by absentee ballot, then I'm fine with that.
Well, I was gonna change my address to Florida before the November election. So imagine that, because my vote in Seattle that's not going to Trump in Washington. So, yeah, I just wanted to be out of America before November. But if I get out of America before January, I think I can avoid our impending civil war. That's recorded now, me saying that. But so there's no civil war coming. It's going to be pockets of gun-toting, the same people showing up to the protests. That they're the ones that are the Trump supporters showing up, and they can barely drive a boat. So we're
Eddie?
good.
Calling
Eddie?
time on this one.
The fastest way to get out of a hole is to stop digging.
I do not. Let me go on record and say, no, I'm good with getting rid of. All right, there's my record. So,
Somebody grab that shovel quick.
yeah, please.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Video will be up
Good night.
next few days.
Yep.
It's good night from Scandinavia. The rest of you
Have a good
go
day. and
play with
rest
the
of
rest
us.
of your day.
Yeah. Night, night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.